My name is Dr. Wes Fondren. I'm the Associate Dean of the Graduate School at the College of Graduate and Continuing Studies at Coastal Carolina. Also the Director of the Johnson Brown Center, which one day I need to connect up with you guys. It's a brand new center that a couple of families here in Myrtle Beach gave $1 million to help unemployed and underemployed local youth skill up, and so I need to find out at some point in time what those skills need to be, and so sometime I may ask you guys some questions. And I'm also Associate Professor of Communication at Coastal, and so this is a communication talk. This is part of a class that I teach at our Masters in Communication, and so you're getting a piece of that. And let me go ahead and get to what we're going to talk about here in a second. This is where we're headed. We are legitimately going to talk about superpowers, not make-believe. We're going to talk about actual superpowers. We're going to dig into what communication is, and then we're going to talk about unlocking some of those superpowers as they relate to communication. And just a moment of kind of credential stuff. My undergraduate degree, as you can tell, I'm from the South, from my deep Southern accent. I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Does anybody know what's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama? The best college football team in the world. Roll Tide, that's right, that's right. I grew up in that city, and my undergraduate degree is from Alabama. I have an undergraduate degree in cognitive psychology. I have a master's degree from Samford, and my PhD is actually in communication and information science with a concentration in cognitive psychology. And so I look at how the brain works as it relates to communication. And for the 15 years in between all that stuff, I was in technology. I spent the last 5 years as the chief technology officer for a large company. And so I specifically look at technology, communication, and psychology, which, when we're done with this talk, I'm going to have to flip things around a little bit. I have a ChatGPT talk right after this one. And so that's kind of a convergence of a lot of my areas: technology, communication, and psychology. And so, which is also a superpower, by the way. If you get a chance to play around with it and use it, it's a powerful, powerful tool in artificial intelligence in general. Okay, so let's get you guys to talk for a second. I need to know if you can name a movie that has a character with a superpower. Okay, name one. Ant-Man. Ant-Man. How many Ant-Mans are there?
3 at least.
There's 3 Ant-Man movies. Okay.
Thor.
How many of those are there?
I think 4.
So 4 Thors? I sound like Abraham Lincoln. 4 Thors and 20 years ago. Yeah, that's right.
Superman.
How many Supermans are there?
I have no idea.
There were 3 in the 80s, and then now there's a couple or 3 Man of Steel, and so there's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 of those. Anything else?
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, there's at least 2 of those, not to mention TV shows.
Iron Man.
How many Iron Mans? 3? I'm running out of fingers. Anything else?
How about the Harrison Ford?
Captain America.
Captain America. Yeah, Captain America. There was a couple. There was a Hulk. There was. There's now a Hawkeye. So, and that's just Marvel and DC. We haven't talked about like Batman and all those. What apart from comic books? Can you think of any superpower movies?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. Okay, the single most popular adolescent teenage fiction book series ever existed, and then I think they did 7 movies, I think, or something like that, and now they've done a couple more, and when I was a little kid, it wasn't comic books, and it wasn't a little boy that was a wizard that had superpowers. It was a guy that had a force he could use. Star Wars, yeah, Star Wars. Star Wars was huge when I was a kid. I mean, it was what everybody was into. And I think there are 9 of those now, like the old ones, the middle ones, and the new ones. I think there's at least 9 of those, and it branches off. In a TV series, and we could go on and on and on, even apart from comic books, apart from Star Wars, apart from Harry Potter. There's all sorts of movies and television shows about someone having a superpower. Matter of fact, I'd be willing to bet that at least somebody in this room has had a dream before that you had a superpower, that you could fly, or you could breathe underwater, or you could teleport, or some kind of superpower in a dream that you had. And maybe even when you were a little kid, you played like you could read people's minds, or you could, have. I know as a little boy, we played superpower stuff all the time, and I would imagine some of you probably played that before. How many billions of dollars do you think we've spent on entertainment, just in the movies you've named, when it comes to superpowers? Yeah, I mean, it's the top rung of our entertainment spending for a lot of people, is this idea of somebody has a superpower. And we long for that, right? I mean, isn't it not just our dreams and our childhood play and our entertainment, that we would love to have a power that other people don't have? I mean, it's why we get skills training, right? Because I want to be able to. I teach communication. One part of that is persuasion. Isn't that a superpower? I mean, to crawl inside someone else's head and make them think what you want them to think, that's pretty amazing. Matter of fact, I'll be candid with you. There's a lot of persuasion stuff that I refuse to teach the students at Coastal. You know why? I don't know them well enough. It's unethical because you know how to do some of it. And I don't trust their motives for some of them in particular. I have a pretty good idea of what they're trying to. What'd you say? Yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what they're trying to persuade someone for. My point is that we as a culture are obsessed with superpowers, even globally. Those are the big global entertainment things. And we long for it, and communication really is a superpower. I think I told you that I was the chief technology officer for a large company for a number of years. I've never had a computer class in my life. And I remember I went to the day I think I got the promotion, I went to a executive meeting, and I went with my boss. We were trying to persuade the president to spend about $500,000 on some new servers. And he gave his talk, and when he got done, the president said, "I don't think so. We've got other places." And I said, "Could I just mention one thing?" And I did some communication stuff, and he said the most horrible thing. He looked at me and he said, "Next time, just you come to the meeting." And I realized, I think I'm going to get a bad evaluation from the guy beside me. And they ended up letting him go. Because what was happening was there was important information the decision makers needed, and it wasn't getting there. And if you can learn how to communicate well, you can literally rule the world. Does anybody know who the public speakers think the best public speaker of the 20th century was? The people that study rhetoric, do you know who they think the best speaker in the 20th century was? Do you have a guess? Hitler. And up there's, Churchill and JFK and some other ones. It's powerful. If you can communicate well and know how to use communication tools, you can be powerful. You can have a superpower. You can make people believe things that you want them to believe. Now, I'm putting a little bit of a negative spin on this. I want to put a positive spin on it. Like, we do this a lot with our students where we persuade them to finish a class. Or, if you think about how great it would be if you could communicate more effectively at your job. Can you think about how often communication is a problem at work? Or forget work, relationships. Have you ever had a relationship where someone had an expectation of you they didn't communicate? Mom. Or the other direction. Like, I thought I was clear about not leaving dishes in the sink or whatever. Expectations play a huge role in our relationships, our business relationships, our romantic relationships. And today we're going to talk about that superpower, about understanding communication, but expectations. But before I do that, I have a treat, and I'm so happy that most everyone in this room is a lady. And I apologize to the guys in the room. You already know the thing that I'm about to show. I'm about to show a tutorial video on how to use a urinal. And so you do have superpowers, but I need to make sure you know how to use a urinal before we go forward. And so I'm going to talk over the first part just a little bit. So I I haven't been in this building, and so I don't know. Are there urinals in this building? There are? Okay. And
That's the 3 women employees.
at Coastal, I'll tell you, at Coastal, this is exactly how the men's rooms are laid out in most of our buildings. Matter of fact, if you were to sketch them, it would look similar to what you're about to see. Let me skip ahead just a little bit.
Hey, Billy. Billy, over here.
So
Billy, where are you going?
he's going to teach Billy how to use the...
Laboratory. That's
Here we go.
grand. Do you know what you're going to do when you get there? Well, good for you, Billy. But do you know which urinal you're going to use? But, Billy, what if somebody's already using one?
A swirly stand is where they stick your head in the toilet and flush it.
You don't want to be a swirly stand, do you? Would you like to know what to do if there is someone there? There are
Okay.
5 urinals.
This is exactly what it looks like at Coastal in lots of places.
If no one is there, you can choose anyone you want, with the exception of 5.
Okay.
If there is someone there,
He said you can use any one of them except number 5. Now, there's something you can't see because it's bleached out in this video that makes number 5 not a good option. Guys, anybody have a guess?
Closest to the door.
It's the door. The door is right beside it. I don't know why they do that, but they put some of them right beside the door. And he says you can pick any of the 5 except that one for obvious reasons.
you just need to follow these simple rules. If someone is at number 3, then you should go to number 1. If someone is at number 1, you should go to 3. If someone is at 5, you should go
Now, you'll notice there's a 1 urinal buffer up until this one. Now, there's a 3 urinal buffer.
to 1. If someone is at 1 and 3, you should go to 5.
Logic.
Therefore, if 1 and 5 are taken, then 3 should be
There you go.
used.
Logic.
If someone is at 2, you go to 4.
A little bit weird
If
logic.
someone is at 4, you go to 2.
Okay.
Those are the easy ones.
Here's where it gets complicated.
What happens if all of the even or odd spots are already taken? Here's some examples. If all of the odds are taken, you can use 2 but not 4.
Too close to the door.
If all of the evens are occupied, you can use 1 but not 5, and certainly not
You can't
3.
split 2 guys
If
when
no
they're...
pattern has been set and odds and evens are being used,
Here's where it really
it's
picks up
more
speed.
difficult. If 1, 2, and 4 are being used, you should use 3.
Oh.
If this is being used, 2, 4, and 5, you should use 1. 1, 4, and 5 use 2. 3 and 4 use 1. 1 and 2 use 4. 1, 2, and 5 use 3. 2, 3, and 4 use 1. 4 and 5 use 2.
Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. Now, this gets crazy. The combinations don't flip. Like one should flip over, it doesn't. There are single urinal buffers that should hold up, but they don't in some scenarios. And there's some that are just absolutely not an option. You better go like wash your hands for 5 minutes and then come back or something. And what's crazy about this, what's your name? Paul?
Kyle.
Paul and Kyle? I would bet you $1 Paul and Kyle knew all these rules. Now, Kyle, was there ever a moment, and I hope to goodness, no one's ever answered yes on this, and I hope not, this is not going to be, was there ever a moment that your dad took you to a public bathroom and said, Kyle, we're going to stand here for about an hour, and men are going to come in and use these journals, and I'm going to explain a complicated set of rules to you, so bring your notepad and your ink pen. This is an important, child-rearing moment here for you to learn this stuff. Did that ever happen? Yeah, I'm so glad. Paul, that ever happened to you? Okay, great. I am so happy to hear. I have this fear that one of these days they're like, yeah, Dad took me every Saturday to the ballpark and we stood in the urinals. Now, what's crazy, if you think about this, what's crazy is that they knew all of these complicated rules without ever having to be taught. Matter of fact, I'd be willing to bet no one ever said, hey, dude, don't pick that one. But somehow they learned it. Complicated rules. And you know when someone breaks them, don't you? Like Kyle, yeah, that's right. So Kyle, if you're standing at number 1 and a stranger comes in, or even somebody you know comes in, and they pass 5, 4, 3, he's laughing, and they stop at the second one, you notice, right? Yeah. It has your attention. Matter of fact, when he starts crossing over about number 4, it gets your attention. And Paul, how would you say that you feel physically if someone were to walk up and stand to that one right beside you?
My personal space is being violated.
Yeah, you'd feel like something wrong is happening here. Now, to let the guys off the hook, let's use a slightly different example. What's your name?
Stephanie.
Stephanie. Stephanie, do you like going to see movies?
I do.
Okay, great. So let's say that Stephanie wants to go see a movie this afternoon, and it's Wednesday afternoon. There's not a whole lot of people at the theater, and so she buys her ticket, and she gets in there, and she's got the whole theater. This happens to me occasionally. I'll go see some obscure movie, and I got the whole place to myself. And she's like, "Oh, this is perfect. I can text during the movie, and I've got the whole place for $7 or whatever." And she picks the best seat in the house. Anybody know what the best seat is? Yeah, it's about 3/4 of the way up in the middle. It's perfect distance from the speakers and not too close to the screen. And so she goes to the best seat in the house and sits down and gets comfortable. Well, it's just about to start. And she sees a stranger, a guy, in a strange-looking weird coat with a bag of popcorn. And he enters the theater and he looks around. And her first thought is, please no. And so he starts making his way up the stairs, and he stops at her row. Does he have your attention at this point, probably? Sure. Yeah, right? And then he makes his way down the row, and he sets in the second best seat in the house. Do you know where that is? Right beside Stephanie. Now, they both bought a ticket, right? Does he have a right to that seat? Does it make logical sense that the second best seat in the house is the one he'd want to take? Probably. But you know something's wrong, right? How would you feel physically?
Unsafe.
Yes. You would probably feel, and I'm using this word in the danger way, aroused. Like your heart rate would go up, your pupils would dilate a little bit. You would have a physiological response, the same thing that any guy would have if someone violated one of these rules. Well, there's a guy, there was a guy, he passed away a few years ago, named Ed Hall that explained this. But before I can explain it, I need to talk about what communication is, because believe it or not, that's an act of communication. Maybe unintentional, but it's an act of communication. And matter of fact, does anybody want to take a swing? I love hearing people's answers to this question. Does anybody want to take an attempt at what is communication? Because I know that everybody knows what it is. I'm not trying to trick anybody. Stephanie?
A way to convey information.
Okay, it's transferring information. So that's one aspect of it, is that I slipped Stephanie a note, and I have just communicated. Can anybody think of any other definition of communication? Okay, that accidental communication is not often what we're talking about. That if I were to drop the note and someone else were to pick it up, it maybe wouldn't be intended communication, but there's some motive or effort. Yeah, that's maybe one part of it. Yeah.
Initiating an action or reaction.
Okay. Often one of the things that gets left off of communication when we try to define it is this idea of reaction or response or outcome or something like that. But often it is an expression for the purpose of getting some type of interaction or dialogue or something. So yeah.
Sending an idea.
Okay.
Or receiving one.
Okay, which is pretty amazing, right? Like I can make a noise with my vocal cord. I can make this sound elephant, and somehow in your head, an image of an elephant. In your brain, the thought goes from my brain to your brain by making noise. That's pretty astounding. Or scribbling. Scribbling. I make some shapes, and an idea appears in your mind. That's pretty astounding. That's part of what we study is this, and when it breaks down sometimes. I'll tell you, communication is really hard to define. Matter of fact, when I was getting my PhD, one of the comprehensive exam questions was, what is communication? And we only had 4 hours to answer that question. And I will tell you, I was not even getting halfway there by the time they came and took the exams up. But that was part of what they were wanting to see, is what's the first part you start explaining. Because what is communication is complicated. It is a massive, huge question, and it's one of those areas that people think they know because they've seen it done badly. Now, you've been to restaurants and had bad food before, but I would be willing to bet eating bad food doesn't make you feel like a chef. But there are a lot of things in life that people believe they know because they've experienced it badly. Like they think, I'm a good friend because I know I've had bad friends before and I know not to do that. Or parenting. How many people think they're going to be a good parent because they saw the mistakes their parents made? Seeing something done badly does not mean that someone knows how to do it well. It's what we teach, the Masters in Communication and our communication degree and all that stuff. That's part of what we're teaching students is they think often that they know how to communicate well. They don't. Matter of fact, Those of you that went to college and spent some time there know that's true of college professors too. Lots and lots of professors think that they're good at teaching because when they went through school, they recognized bad teaching. That does not make a good teacher. And you had some bad teachers. I've never been to a university that didn't have bad teachers. Loving Spanish doesn't make you a great Spanish teacher. Loving math doesn't make you an amazing math teacher. And communication is one of those things that if you can learn how to do it well, it's a superpower. And a lot of people think they know how to do it well, but they don't. And it's one of the great joys of my job is getting to do this. So let's talk about what communication is for a second. This is going to sound super simple, and like I can't believe we're making it this elementary. But at its core, it's actually a question. A guy named Harold Laswell, back in the 1930s, came up with this, 1940s, came up with this. And he said it's really at the heart of communication is the question, who said what to whom with what effect? And we weren't interested in the question. What we were interested in were the parts. There's really 4 parts to communication. And this is where we start really making some progress. And this is what happened. About the time he did this, people from psychology and people from rhetoric and speech writing and people from radio and people from political science, and there were all these different researchers that in the 1940s came together and said, wait a minute, we're all studying the same topic from different directions. We should come together and study it. And the field of communication was born. It's only about 80 years old as an academic discipline. And we draw from all sorts of things, technology, psychology, all that kind of stuff. And the idea is if you can break something down to its parts, you can improve it, you can fix it, you can see where it went wrong. You think about your car. When you try to drive and something doesn't work, you go to the mechanic and he says, let me look at the parts. Because if you understand the parts, you can figure out how to put it together. When you go to the doctor, this is a little bit of a weird example, but since I just used a urinal, I'll use it. A urinalysis. When you go to the doctor and they ask for a sample, they don't, yes, you're healthy. Or, they don't put it on a shelf and say, compared to all those other ones, your urine looks pretty good. What they do is they break it down into its parts and they spin it until the iron comes out, and then they capture that, and then the sodium comes out. They break it down to its parts and they look at the parts and they say, okay, now we can figure out whether you're healthy or not. Well, that's what we do with communication. The fancy name for this is message analysis, but it's really just saying there's 4 parts. Outcome. What was your name? Catherine? Like Catherine was saying, there is often some kind of reaction or response, and often the outcome gets left off when people talk about communication. But at its very core, these are the 4 parts. And we have whole disciplines inside communication for each one of these. For communication analysis, for audience analysis, for message analysis, and even sender analysis. And it goes way back. It goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle was the first person that said the sender's important. He called it ethos. He said the character and the ethic of the speaker is an important part of the message. And you can know this. This is also PR, by the way. You know this. If you have a celebrity that is you're endorsing your sponsor or whatever, and they do something wrong, better drop them fast, because all of a sudden, Tiger Woods is not the person you want on the front of the golf magazine or whatever. So anyway, we're gonna look at this a little bit. Next time, we're gonna look at it even more. There's another session in 2 weeks on stress, on the role of communication and stress reduction. And it's a little bit for you, but it's really more toward your customers or your clients. Because if you can reduce people's stress, the opportunity for communication goes up. When I give out a syllabus the very first day of class, I'm managing expectations, because if I can reduce the student's stress, the opportunity to communicate gets higher. And we're going to talk a little bit about that next time. But today, we're going to talk about pre-communication. Now, this is what's fascinating to me about this particular part of studying communication, is realizing communication happens before communication happens. And that's what most people overlook. They'll look at an event, they'll see an outcome. I don't know why she got so mad at me. All I did was walk in and say, how are you doing today? And they'll get into a tangle with somebody, or a customer just won't. They'll think, gosh, I thought I had them. Like I gave them all the information, or donors. Some of you may have donors. This has a lot to do with asking people for money, and you'll think, gosh, man, I feel like I gave them the best pitch and nothing. And I hear this a lot with students that go to job interviews that don't understand this in a job interview. I'll say, how'd the interview go? It went great. I'm pretty sure they're going to call and offer me the job. And then a couple weeks later, it's like, I don't know why they didn't ever call. Well, they're probably, part of it was communication. And so, all right, let's talk about pre-communication. And I need to talk about Ed Hall, the guy I mentioned a minute ago. So Ed Hall, in the 1960s, came up with this idea of proxemics. Now, part of this you've heard before, and a lot of this you know intuitively. You don't need me to teach you. You know the stuff that he articulated. He expressed what a lot of people already knew. And that is that we have in our mind an idea of our space. Proxemics is two Latin words put together. Proximity, prox meaning space or closeness, and then metrics. And he said that it's really only 4 personal spaces. And I'm going to hit these real fast, and I'm going to go from the bottom up. So when you go to the mall or to Walmart or wherever, and you walk down an aisle or a corridor, most people are going to walk about 10 feet from you. And 10 feet, if you were measured on the floor, is actually closer than it seems. Like I'm probably about 10 feet from Stephanie right now. And we don't even notice. Like if Stephanie and I were walking in the mall and somebody walked down the other side, right after they walked out of our field of vision, if I said, hey, Stephanie, what color shirt was that person wearing? She might say, ooh, I don't know. So I know someone just walked by us, but because we don't even attend to them, and that's one of my deeper areas of study is attention, the role of attention in communication, but we don't attend to those people. Matter of fact, we call it inattentional blindness. It's there, it's in front of our eyes, we don't see it. Because it's not of interest to us. I don't need to know things that are outside that. Now, if you're walking through the Walmart parking lot and somebody's 12 feet away and they veer over into your 10 feet, that's probably going to get your attention. Or if you're sitting on a bus or something like that and they pick a seat within 10 feet, that gets our attention. And we have ways of communicating that. One of the more interesting things that we communicate is social distance. These are people like maybe today, like people that you've just met or you want to be in a social environment with, and you feel comfortable being within the 10-foot radius, but not too close yet. And do you know how we in America at least define or create these boundaries? I'm going to hold my arm out 2 feet. You hold your arm out 2 feet. Yeah, and Kyle, can I shake your hand? Like, can you go? And so if you don't believe me that this is a really well-established rule, next time you meet somebody, just keep walking. Oh. Thanks, Kyle. Or, even worse, shake their hand and then take one step back and see what their face communicates to you, because this is how we communicate social distance. Hey, how are you doing? And we maintain a 4 to 6 foot barrier between us and them, and that allows both of us to be comfortable. Now, other countries, it's a little bit different, but you know when someone breaks these rules, right? And you didn't probably have a class in that. The next is personal space, and we define this a little differently. We usually hug the person or touch them in some way, touch their shoulder, their arm, and then we don't move back as far. And this is, your cousin, your best friend, whatever. And then, of course, intimate space is, people that we're literally close to. I mean, if you think about the words we use, we're not as close as we used to be. We use the language to represent physical space a lot of times. We've just become more distant, like this space kind of thing. One of my favorite moments of the day used to be when I got off work at 5. I have 4 kids, and when they were little, when I would walk in the door, usually one of them would cling a hold of me, and I could hear a couple other ones coming, and there was just this moment of arriving home that was very physical and very loving, and they were using their little bodies to say, I missed you today, and I want to be close to you, and I'm glad you're home, all with a hug, and I love that. And anyway, so he came up with this theory, but this theory has a huge problem. Anybody know what the problem with this theory is? I mean, apart from being cultural, do you know what the problem today in America, like in our world today, do you know what the problem with this theory is?
You still need to be able to attend at that personal space.
That's an excellent guess. By the way, I won't embarrass anybody that takes, I hated teachers that would embarrass people. Because what they taught us was don't open your mouth, don't make eye contact. I promise to never embarrass you, even if it's horribly wrong, like what Stephanie just said. I'm kidding, I'm teasing, I'm joking. Yes, that's right, Amanda. It doesn't take account personal space that's not physical. Like,
Emotional,
right, you meet somebody.
a listening boundary.
Right. There's all sorts of personal boundaries that we have that don't involve inches and feet. You meet someone for lunch for the first time and they say, hey, when was the last time you menstruated? What? Or, hey, just so I know where we're at here, if you'll tell me how much money you made, your gross income last year, I'll tell you how much I am so I know where we're at. Like, you recognize that person doesn't understand boundaries, personal space. And it's not as ridiculous as that. Sometimes it is as simple as asking somebody how they're doing. And what you were looking for was, I'm fine, how are you? And instead, what they give you is, well, I'm in the middle of a raging divorce, and I just found out from the plumber, and you realize, oh my goodness, like we're good. We just went from public space to straight into intimate space. I wasn't looking for that. And what we realized was he was right about physical stuff, but there are many ways of not recognizing personal space when it comes to language and communication. Matter of fact, sometimes that may be the most painful. My students, you know what the big fear of some of my students are when it comes to this? Being tagged in a photo. They're like, whoa, do not tag me in one of those photos, because if you tag me in that photo, mom is going to see that on Instagram or whatever, and that's a violation of their personal space, is identifying them online on something they don't want to be identified with. And stuff like that. And they have their digital presence is way more important to them than their physical presence sometimes. And so matter of fact, they consider who they allow to follow them, are they going to see who I'm friends with, or what. They think about all this kind of stuff because it's a personal boundary for them. Okay, the problem. And there was a famous researcher named Judy Burgoon who's the one that came up with this. The problem is that it doesn't take into account what's really going on, which is expectations. That's the pre-communication, the communication that happens before you ever get there. And let me skip this part, actually. Okay. She came up with a theory called expectancy violation, because what she was really interested in was what happens when your expectations aren't met in some way. And what she said was, to really be one of the superpowers of communication in this area is being able to assess someone's expectations beforehand. Like, this is what I teach my students about job interviews. Very often when they get called and invited to a job interview, they are so excited to get that phone interview or that in-person interview, they just say thank you and that's it. What is far better for them to say is, that's wonderful. I'm very excited about coming next Tuesday afternoon at 3. Is it okay if I ask a couple of questions about the interview? I don't know of a single time that someone said, no, you're not allowed to ask any questions. And asking questions like, will I be asked to give a presentation or an opportunity to give one? How many people will I be interviewing with? Will this just be an interview with you, or will there be multiple interviews? And asking some questions to find out what is going to happen. Even some of the kind of jobs that they interview, I even recommend that they ask things like, so an ideal candidate that comes through this, is this a formal interview, or is this an informal interview with just a couple? And once they start asking those questions, very often the person who's going to interview them will give them lots of information. Now imagine two students or graduates roll in for an interview, and one of them is dressed in a coat and tie, has a presentation in their hand, brought business cards and a resume printed out, and they sat down beside someone else who just showed up because they didn't know any of that was going to be expected. And they're like, hey, what are you doing with a thumb drive? Like, oh, I asked, and they said that they would love to see a 5-minute interview about what I thought the vision of this role would be. And they're like, they told you that? And they're like, well, I asked. The difference between assessing expectations, knowing how to assess expectations beforehand, could be a make or break. That's a superpower. In a relationship, in employment, I mean, how many times have you had an employee that didn't meet your expectations and you thought, did I communicate to them clearly that was my expectation? And then had to go back and say, hey, in case I didn't tell you this, don't do that. Or that's not how we do this. Or that does not represent who we are as a company. And so there's one side is assessing expectations. The other side is communicating expectations on the front end. That's also a skill. Being able to figure out what do I need to communicate so that they know exactly what my expectations are, that sets some people up for success as a boss and as a company. Okay. I don't have a ton of time to get into this, and so let me just casually mention this. Part of assessing expectations is thinking about where they come from, too. I don't know if you've ever, you may have had a chance to travel internationally, but man, the second you step off the plane, you realize they have different expectations in whatever country you went to, probably. And it's shocking sometimes to see how different expectations are, whether it's greetings. Like, I got off a plane in Italy one time, and all of the men that I was meeting there kissed me. And I was like, hey, guys, I'm from Alabama. That's new to me. And I didn't know, am I supposed to kiss them back? Or is this just like a receive sort of thing or whatever? And then when I've gone to Asian countries, do not shake hands. Physical contact is not cool. Like, they're not interested. You stop at 4 feet and acknowledge each other. And this, other examples of even how we talk to each other. I went to Beirut one time, and when I was doing the training for it, I spent some time in Lebanon, they told me, whatever you do not make eye contact with women. And I said, I'm from Alabama. We don't walk past people without saying, hey, how you doing? How are you? And it's rude for us to not make eye contact with someone and speak to them. And they were like, you don't do that. That's considered forward and like an advance toward another woman. And then I started thinking about the phrase eye contact, like touching someone with your eyes. And so I bought mirrored sunglasses because I thought, I'm never going to be able to pull this off. And so I wore sunglasses around most of the time I was there because I thought, I'm going to get punched in the face because I made eye contact with some guy's wife. Well, that's an expectation. I would have not met that expectation. I would have broken that expectation unintentionally, which is also how we get into fights and arguments and conflict, right? Like, if I had known you wanted me to do that, I would have done it, I promise. I just didn't know that's what you wanted from me. That's expectations. That's the communication starting before the communication begins. And thinking about where those come from, sometimes they come from people's upbringing, right? Like, I'm confident you have probably been in some type of romantic relationship where you realize their family's weird. I remember I was married for a long time, and I remember when I came back from our honeymoon, I made breakfast, and southern, Alabama breakfast kind of thing. And so I thought I was being the good husband and all that stuff, and I put everything out on the table. I brought her in. I sat her down at the table. I went into the kitchen to get orange juice or something, and when I came back, I couldn't believe this. She was putting sugar on her grits. And I stopped her. I was like, whoa, wait, that's not salt. That's sugar. And she went, I know. And she kept pointing. I was like, what are you doing? And she said, I'm putting sugar on the grits. She said, this is the way everybody eats it. And I thought, what a monster. Like, what have I done? Why didn't we go over this before? How did this not come up before we got married? And she said, everybody eats them this way. And I was like, oh, my goodness. And, of course, I'm teasing. But upbringing, how to have an argument. One of the talks I give at Coastal in this is how to have an argument. It's about conflict resolution. Talk about superpowers. Being able to prevent conflict, like managing expectations, prevent conflict and resolve conflict in a healthy way, that is a superpower. I've actually been paid as a consultant a few times to come into a business that the board was in conflict and just help resolve conflict when it came around vision or communicating vision or personnel issues and that kind of stuff. That's a superpower that you could have. You may already have it. Okay, let me skip this. What I really need to get to is what happens with the expectations. And what Judy Burgoon said was that what we're really interested in is when expectations are violated. And academics, as you know, a lot of times like to use really complicated words for really simple things. Like someone will say, I'm giving a talk on how to drink water. And you're like, great, I know how to drink water. I'll go just make sure that I got all my bases covered. Then you come in and there's a PowerPoint that says like self-automated hydration techniques in 21st century mammals, and you're like, uh-oh, I thought this was going to be about drinking water. This is a good example. All the word valence means is positive or negative. It's a chemistry word. It just means that sometimes there's an act, a violation, that is positive, and sometimes there is a violation that is negative. Can you think of a time that can you think of an example? It doesn't have to be a real example. Can you think of an example of when your expectations were violated in a positive way?
Like a surprise party?
Yes, that's a good example. You were not expecting, or maybe expecting a gift, and instead you got a surprise party. What were you going to say?
I was going to say surprise.
Really? Yeah, that's a good example. This morning, Amanda made me a very delicious cup of espresso coffee. I was expecting Bojangles, and so when I walked in, I thought, okay, I'm going to get a cup of Bojangles coffee. That'd be great. And she's like, just a second, I'll be right back. And she came back with this delicious brew, and violated my expectations in a positive way. Isn't that what you want with your customers or your clients or your everybody? Is finding ways to, remember the first part, assess their expectations and then do something that goes beyond it. And I'm sure you guys have all heard the Smucker's example about they always put, was it an extra ounce of jelly in the jar at one point in time, and companies trying to find ways to violate people's expectations in a positive way. The important part is that she said is that it's about the act. Let me go backwards. It's about the act. And so don't think about the person. Don't think about the situation. Think about the action that was done. Now, can you think of I bet you all can you think of a negative violation of expectations? Can you maybe think of an example? Yeah.
You think you're going into a meeting for a positive recommendation. You go in and you're getting fired.
Absolutely. Or you're just getting reprimanded for something. You're like, oh, the boss wants to talk to me about that great job I did on that thing. And instead of saying you did a great job on that thing, they say, yeah, that was great, but what really bothered me was, and you get blindsided by something negative because you had an expectation coming in that the insult or reprimand, the action, didn't meet. I mean, read reviews. That's all this is people saying, I had an expectation my food would be hot, my food ended up being cold. Or I thought the waitress was going to be this way, and she was that way. Positive and negative. Like when we got there, it was raining, the place was busy, and Darla went out of her way to make sure that we were comfortable. That's a positive violation. And looking for ways to do that, and you guys know this, I mean, there are boundaries to this. You know, you don't be like, hey, I really want you to like us. Here's $100. That's not going to work very often or much. Or when people are trying in a disgenuine, a way that's not genuine. These acts themselves are things that you have to assess about what would be appropriate for your client, your customers, or whatever. And you've had people get it wrong before, like where you just met someone and then they give you an over-the-top birthday present. You're like, we just met like 2 weeks ago. I didn't realize you were going to buy me an Xbox, or or whatever. And you realize that they don't understand the proportion to these sorts of things. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way or a gauge that you use to predict?
Assessing expectations? Yeah.
Your assessment?
There are tons of tricks, and probably the easiest one is simply asking questions. Matter of fact, the talk that I give next time in 2 weeks has a big chunk of that in it, and about how to it's actually about how to gather information on things we're uncertain about, is what the next one is. Because stress comes a lot of times from things we're uncertain about. And so the talk itself is about that, and it has some stuff in there. But asking questions is one. Asking or looking at past behaviors. My daughter called me in a panic last night. She's started dating this guy, and my daughter works for I probably should have told you this. This is a disclaimer. My daughter works for Milk and Honey. She's a baker for the head baker guy. And so she started dating this guy, and he called last night and said, hey, Mom's birthday's Sunday. We would love for you to make a cake for Mom for her birthday. And she called me in a panic. She's like, Dad, what am I going to do? What if I get this wrong? What if I don't? What if she doesn't like? And she had enormous amounts of stress and fear and, her mom's birthday and meeting the mom and all that stuff. And I said, have you asked any questions? And she's like, I don't even know what to ask. I was like, okay, ask, what's her favorite food? What kind of cakes does she normally like? Is there anything she's allergic to? And we went through a list of like a half a dozen questions. She's like, okay, I'll talk to you in just a few minutes. And so she called him back and she's like, okay, I got it down to 3 types of cakes that she really likes and things that she doesn't like. And she started figuring out what the expectations of the mother were by talking. And so talking, asking questions, asking past, what did she have last year for her birthday? Does she normally have? And so past behavior, questions, sometimes not even questions, but just dialoguing, talk about the interview for a second. I tell the students this with the interview thing about asking questions like, ideal candidates in the past, have they done presentations? And there's other ways to word it, but it's a trick though, being able to assess people's expectations. But to be completely honest with you, most of the time, people that even try to assess the expectations have already set themselves up for success because most people aren't even aware of them, the pre-communication. And so, I am grateful when someone asks me questions about what I want in an interview. I've been on 38 job searches at Coastal, and we are required by law to interview 3 people for each one. So that's over 100 people that I've interviewed at Coastal for professor jobs and administrative and all that kind of stuff. And when I was in IT, I did even more. I hired tons of people when I was in IT because we fired a lot of people. There's a lot of bad computer people out there. Or a lot of people that are not good, that are great with technology and bad with this. And they violate expectations all the time in dealing with customers in bad ways. But I loved it when someone would say, hey, what are you, can I ask a couple questions about what you're looking for in the interview? I was like, absolutely, I would love to tell you. All right, so this is an important distinction. So we have 3 pieces to this. The first is the expectation that exists before the communication happens. The urinal example, the movie theater example. So that exists. Then we have an action, picking a seat, or picking a urinal, buying a gift, having a surprise. There's some action that happens. And it doesn't even have to be something complicated. Sometimes it could be a handshake. A stranger is sitting there in a waiting room and no one has talked to them, and you walk up and say, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Wes or whatever. And so it can be a very simple act and very complicated, but the act itself is what we're talking about. The third piece of it, and this is the piece that most people are really interested in, is about you. And that's the assessment of the person. So people have an expectation beforehand they don't even realize they have usually. An action happens and they determine that's a good or a negative, a positive or negative action. And then they look at you and they have to make a judgment about you that is also positive or negative. It's an important distinction. The action and the person are 2 separate things. And what that ends up with is, what we end up with is 4 possible outcomes. Positive, 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 negative, negative, positive, negative, negative. Now, some of these are super simple. Negative, negative. We would say the action of punching someone in the face is a negative action. And so if someone walks up and punches you in the face, they did a negative action that makes you think less of them. Robbing somebody. I got robbed one time back in Alabama, and the guy was walking up to me, and I thought he was kind of disheveled, and I thought he'd been in an accident because he looked like he'd just been in an accident. And he walked up to me and he said something, and I actually stepped closer to him and I said, I'm sorry, what was that? And I reached out like that, and he pulled the gun up and said, give me your freaking wallet. I understood him the second time. And the presence of the weapon was a negative which made me think negative things about him and decide I'm not interested in pursuing this relationship anymore. And so those are easy. Negative, negative's easy. Positive, positive are easy. It's like Sam said, the surprise party. You weren't expecting a party. You got a party. You think positively of everyone that participated. The couple in the middle, they're a little confusing. When you do something positive, and the act is positive, but you get a negative reward, is the word she used. Can anybody think of an example of that? The surprise party? Maybe, and what changes may be the expectation. Like, I told you not to throw me a party. I told you I was not in the mood for a party. I told you I wanted to come home and rest. Yeah. Now, the act of throwing a surprise party, in general, we'd say that's a positive act. But when it's done with that expectation, we'd say that's negative. Excuse me. And there are others, and they've hurt your feelings before probably, where you did something nice for somebody and then they thought less of you for it because they tried to judge your motives, they wrongly judged your motives, or they thought something else was going on, or they had an expectation they didn't communicate. Like that example. Like imagine this scenario. Someone says, yeah, I'm just really tired when I get off work. And they think, I have communicated to my best friend, I don't want a surprise party. Then a surprise party happens, and they're like, I told you I was tired when I got off work. And they say, I didn't know that meant don't throw a surprise party. I just thought you meant you were telling me you were tired. Can you see how the expectation and the communication caused a breakdown? So yeah, that's an example. You probably can think of some other examples. Where comedy comes from is taking an expectation and messing with it. Because all comedy comes from an unexpected thing happens. If you can see the punchline coming, it's not funny. It's funny when you don't expect it, sort of thing. And so anyway, it all comes back. And the other one, doing something negative and getting a positive is also a little confusing. When someone does a negative act and gets a positive reward, can anybody think of an example? I'm going to give one, but...
Like when the class clown gets rewarded.
Maybe. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. Where he does, well, probably not from the teacher. Maybe from the classmates. Yeah. He may be getting rewarded from the audience, but not the teacher. But that's a creative example. I'll give you an example. What'd you say?
That was very funny.
Thanks. I'll give you an example. When I was 19, I had a mentor of mine. He's still a mentor of mine. His name was Fred. And one night, Fred had invited me over to his house for a party. And I was the college kid, and so he said, hey, why don't you just bring potato chips? We'll bring all the food. You just grab a bag of chips and come to the party. And I was like, great, I'll be there. And this is not the first time he had done this. And he called me the night before and said, hey, I just want to remind you. And I said, yeah, I'm probably not going. Thanks, though. And I'd already told him I would come. I told him I'd bring chips and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I wrote it down and have it memorized. He said, I can't take it anymore. You're lazy, you're undisciplined, you're irresponsible, you're not a person of your word, and I don't think I can be friends with you anymore if this is how you're going to be. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever gotten this upset, but I could feel heat in my cheek, like my face getting red. I could feel like a fever in my cheeks. And it so blindsided me, all I could get out was, I'm sorry you feel that way, and I hung up the phone. And Fred's 13 years older than me and had been an executive for a couple of companies and was real successful in life. And it ate me alive that Fred said that. And I don't know if you've ever been this upset. When my mind wasn't actively engaged in something, it was back to that thing. You know, sitting at a red light, trying to go to sleep at night, taking a shower or whatever. And it wasn't just the thing, it was all the reasons he was wrong. Like, he probably thought, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't what was happening. I couldn't go, and I'm like re-going through all the excuses that I had given him for things in the past that I saw as reasons, the reason that and I was laying in bed one night. I avoided him for 2 weeks. I was laying in bed one Tuesday night. I remember that part. And I thought, maybe there's a couple other options here. Maybe he was just having a bad day. We've all been there. The cashier was having a bad day, and we were the next one in line. And they were ugly to us, and we didn't do anything to deserve it. And I thought, yeah, I've never seen him do that. This would be the first time I'd ever seen him do that. If I was in Vegas, I wouldn't put money on that one. And the second one was, I thought, maybe he's just connected the dots in the wrong way. Like, there's 4 dots, and he thinks it's a square, but it's really a bow tie or something. And he's seen me do this, this, and this, and he thinks he sees a pattern that's not there. And I remember having like a honest moment with myself, and I thought, I go to him for advice because he sees the world so much clearer than I do in some things. That would be weird too. And then after 2 weeks of thinking about it, for the first time, I had the distant possibility of a remote third option way off in the horizon. And I was like, that can't be a third option. My goodness, there's a third option over there. And you know what it was? He was right. I was like, no, he can't be right. Well, if I was gambling, like mentor sees something that mentee doesn't, that one makes the most sense. And so I went to his office the next day, and I said, Fred, I don't believe you. Like, I don't believe what you said is true, but I trust you. If you'll show me, I promise to see. And for 10 years, he showed me. And he was absolutely right. I was lazy, undisciplined, irresponsible, not a person of my word, and I couldn't be trusted with lots of things. And I am confident today, I don't know that anyone will ever be able to persuade me otherwise, that if it had not been for that insulting phone call, I would have never gotten a PhD, I would have never finished college, I would have never gotten a master's degree, I never would have been a chief technology officer, I probably could not have, been a father to 4 kids. There's so many things in my life have happened because I got an insulting phone call, because I was called lazy. Now, calling somebody lazy, undisciplined, irresponsible, not a person of their word is a negative act. It's insulting. Whether it's true or not, saying it that way is harsh and abrasive, and it was tough. How do you think I feel about Fred? Yeah, I love it. I still talk to him every couple of weeks. I talk to Fred. And he got an enormous amount of reward with me for doing that negative act. This is the thing you see in the movies, which never happens in real life, where a friend's hysterical, and they go, oh, thanks, I needed that. That never happens in real life. That slapping a friend when they're hysterical, and that calms them down. But that's slapping somebody is a negative act, and they go, oh, thanks, I needed that. Anyway, this is the pre-part and the explanation for some of this. Oops. This. Sometimes you don't get the outcome you desire. Working backwards and asking, was it an expectation of the person? Did that person have an expectation that I didn't know about? Did I communicate something that was positive or negative? We haven't really gotten into the sender side of the whole thing, but this is part of how we assess when something didn't go wrong, or strategically plan, where we sit down and say, okay, we're going to do this campaign, and we do communication campaign. We're going to do this campaign. What do we think the expectations are? Robert and I gave it. Do they know you, Robert?
Do you know me?
No, do they know you? Robert Blomquist, Amanda's husband, is the marketing coordinator for the College of Graduate and Continuing Studies. And so he and I do tons of campaign kind of stuff together. And we were doing one together about a week ago, trying to get some students to follow, and put ours up there, follow our Instagram. And a whole bunch of students in one big spot. And the person before me went like 20 or 25 minutes and then asked the students to follow their Insta, and they got almost no one. And I talked to one of the students and said, what do you think? What do you think of these talks? And he said, they're like 15 minutes too long. Like, they could just say it in like a short amount of time. And so Robert and I had talked about this. I got up and did like a 2-minute talk and sat down, and 65 followers from a 2-minute talk. That's because I spent a couple minutes. Now, full disclaimer, one of the student I asked was my son. He's going through orientation at Coastal. So I thought I got inside track here, and I was like, hey, son, what's your expectation for these talks? He's like, that they'd be a lot shorter. And I actually sat down with Robert, and I said, Robert, these students that I'm talking to, what is it that you think they're wanting to hear? And he said, jobs and money. I was like, awesome. And that's exactly what my talk ended up being about, was jobs and money. And that was trying to assess their expectations, what it is they want, and then trying to, like they told me, they had a 5-minute talk. Doing it in 2 minutes was trying to meet their expectations in a positive way. All right, so we're out of time. The next talk is in 2 weeks, and it is the stuff that, did you say Layla? That Layla was asking about assessing, and it's called, oh, there it is at the top, reducing stress with language. It's really about reducing other people's stress, but also your stress too. And whether it's clients, customers, donors, whatever you have going on, if you can make people feel more comfortable and reducing anxiety is really what this is about. If you can reduce some of their anxiety, it really helps with the communication process and lets you use your superpower. Yeah.
I hate to ask this at the very end, but do you feel like COVID has strongly affected this communication
Well,
you're experiencing?
so COVID has definitely affected expectations. Like the first time I went to go to Walmart late at night, and I realized Walmart is closed. Like I didn't even realize they had locks on the door at Walmart, and they're closed. And businesses, and so this is a superpower too, being able to manipulate expectations. And COVID, man, was the perfect opportunity to manipulate expectations and never go backwards. I mean, there are restaurants that stayed their dining room stays closed for way longer than they had to because the expectation they could get away with it, right? And so,
Still social distance.
oh yeah, and right, and it has definitely changed our expectations of personal space too. And you guys remember this? Like, there was a collision of expectations. Are you a hugger? Are you a handshaker? Are you a mask person? And we had to assess other people's expectations for what sometimes felt like maybe life or death, or and we had to venture into their personal information, vaccinated or not vaccinated. How were you? And COVID was a really interesting example of expectation changing, shifting, violating expectations. How to assess them in a polite way, and things like that. And so, yeah, it's a real case study in it.
I feel like that still happens though, like with remote work. Like I work from home,
Yeah.
so I still ask people if
Yeah.
I can shake their hand because I don't know.
Well, and that's an interesting case study too, is what are the expectations of remote work? Because as you all probably know, there is a collision happening at Fortune 500 companies where the Fortune 500 companies are saying no more remote work, and the employees are saying, I kind of like this a lot, and I kind of feel like I'm productive, and the CEOs are saying, you're not as productive as you think, and the expectations are colliding.
See, we have the office.
They're
We're fully
finding that
remote.
they're
We
better.
don't have an office,
Uh-huh.
but we're a nonprofit.
Gotcha.
But we have our CEO and our new CEO, we have no intention of ever having brick and mortar.
There you go. And expectation, right? And I imagine if you were interviewing somebody, that would be something you communicate, like, hey, if you got a bad situation in your remote spot, something you need to know because we're going to expect you to do work from your home. Layla?
I was just wondering what inspired you to offer this particular course today?
Mostly Robert. No. I'll tell you. Yeah. So, Layla, that's a great question because I actually did 6 of these at Coastal for staff. It was a series on superpowers, and it was everything from expectation and stress to power differentials in language, like the chess match of conversation that happens a lot of times, conflict resolution. I have one that's just on what is communication, because unpacking that first, being able to figure out when communication goes wrong, what actually happened. And so I've got several that I did at Coastal, and one of the things we started talking about was the opportunity to one of the responsibilities of a state institution, that you may know this, we answer to the Commission of Higher Education, and one of our charges is to better the life of the citizens of South Carolina. Like, whenever I propose a new degree or a new program or something, I have to show hard data about how the citizens of South Carolina are going to benefit. So part of it is doing what we were hired to do and looking for opportunities to do that. Another part of it is you guys are all in business and commerce and stuff. making sure people know about the graduate programs at Coastal. I mean, we have the Masters in the Masters in Communication. It's all evening classes, a master's degree in communication leadership. Like, who doesn't want to be better at communicating and who doesn't want to be better at leading? And they're a mix. Who don't want to have. Right. Yeah, there you go. Old West, that's right. Well, and sometimes it's just people that don't realize it is a superpower. They can't figure out, why does this person keep doing better than me, or why does this one? And we get, physicians and attorneys and different people that have gotten into the workplace and realized I'm deficient. Like, I can't. And a lot of people think of communication as just public speaking, which is pretty important. But using communication tools, like the chat, in 20 minutes I'm giving that ChatGPT talk online. That's a communication tool. It's the hot one right now that's going to make a bunch of money for lots of people. And knowing how to use those tools and figure out what a tool is good for is part of, whether it's a website, Instagram, your cell phone, those are all communication tools. And so that was part of it, Layla, was wanting to do public good in some. But part of it is that this is a lot of fun for me, and we did 6 of these at Coastal. They were enormous fun, and Robert is married to my barista, and and said, hey, this is the kind of stuff that they do at the academy, and maybe we could do a couple down there. And so Robert, it was the one that made that connection, and so we did one of these for the realist. Who was it? We did those, and I've got 2 more that came off of that one, and we're doing the Conway Chamber, and so, but these are a small piece. There's 6. And that was just 6. I do, two. We have 2 years worth of classes on some of this, and so targeting campaigns, persuasion, conflict resolution. Social media management and all that kind of stuff, and so that's where it came from.
What did you say that, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, you definitely violated my.
Good. Well, and that's a tricky statement that you have to know the talk to understand. Yeah. Like, that dude violated my expectation.
What did you say the night classes was called that you were talking about?
The Masters in Communication. In comm leadership, it has a couple branches you can pick: communication leadership or communication activism and advocacy. And so one of them is geared toward nonprofit. Everything's like persuasion as it relates to fundraising, those sorts of things. And then the other side is more leadership.
Those are all part of a master's program?
Yep, the Masters in Communication. And it dips into the MBA a little bit. There's a couple of MBA classes you get along the way if you want to. There's a lot of flexibility with it. And so some of the people will take 2 or 3 MBA classes and count that as part of the MCOM. And at the end of it, you do a project. The last semester is just you doing a project at your workplace. It's a professional master's, and so you do some workplace project that the faculty are helping you with that counts as your thesis, basically. We've had quite a few that have done straight-up workplace projects. They decided. We did some stuff for Neighbor to Neighbor. They had somebody that was there, and they wanted to raise their profile with college students because they weren't getting volunteers, and their senior clientele really wanted more interaction with the 11,000 college students in the area. And so they did these targeted campaigns to get sororities and fraternities connected with volunteering with their organization, so that and that was that person's master's thesis or master's project. And faculty helped. We have a faculty member that helped them with doing targeted PR campaigns and branding, and how to increase their presence in in Instagram, basically, and Snap and stuff. And so, that's the final semester of it. So, but we have others. Robert's got a pamphlet back there for some of it. We've got lots of graduate degrees.
So I handed out the postcards for the MCOM, and I know a lot of you are business folks, so we've got some MBA pamphlets here too.
We just brought up a brand new online master's in accounting if you want to do some accounting stuff. And I think in the next month or so, we've been working on this for a while. It'll be paired with the CPA. That if you get the master's in accounting, you get to sit for CPA for free. We have a testing. You may know this. We have a testing center at Coastal that does all the real estate licensing, all of the TSA. We do all sorts of testing over there, and we're in the last phase of approval for the CPA.
I thought you were going to mention the PFS.
Oh, yeah. So that just got approved. So that just got approved yesterday by the National Accreditation Board. Coastal has a brand new degree coming up called a Bachelor's in Professional Studies. It's a completion degree for anyone that has some college and didn't finish. And they want to finish, but they can't come to in-person classes. So it's an all-online completion degree that you get some credit for workplace, like the stuff you've done in the past. That was one of the big things for us, was that people had done a lot of things in the workplace, and we wanted to give them credit for it. Like, if you've been doing bookkeeping, 3 hours in accounting makes a lot of sense, and so you get credit for that. And so we have an assessment piece now that says, this is what you did in your jobs, this is how much credit that counts for, and then the rest of it's an online completion degree that you can do in your own time frame and stuff. It doesn't have a major. That's one of the things that was the big liberating point. It's a bachelor's in professional studies, so that you end up having a lot more flexibility in the classes you take, and it's customized to you, and it's going to blow up. We just got the approval yesterday to talk about it. We've been we're not allowed to talk about these things until they get accreditation approval, and so just yesterday afternoon we got the green light. They said they gave us approval for it. First one in the state, maybe the first one in the South actually. And we really thought we were going to get a lot of pushback from Clemson and USC because it's online, and because there are 487,000 people in the state of South Carolina last year that had dropped out of college. The pool is massive for degree completion stuff, and so that's going to be a big one. And I hate to do this. I've got to get set up to do a Zoom meeting in a second. I hope I get to see you in a couple weeks, and if not, I really enjoyed spending time with you.